Good morning. Welcome to today's daily. So what we made today is this lava environment. Quite pleased with the results on this one. We take a little look around in Blender with our walking controller. So I kind of made this like level. We got this cave entrance over here. We've got this kind of nice lava river. And there's a little fall off there where it goes into that sunken area. Now, all of this is, of course, procedural. So if I jump in and we start editing this, you can see everything is updating properly, including the separate river, separate terrain, all the different rocks, etc. All of this is dynamic and built to work with Blender. Blender's nice procedural geometry nodes. So if that interests you, sit back and relax. I'm going to do an overview of how I built this, what the nodes are. It'll be a little in-depth, but just keep in mind there is a free download for this available on my Gumroad. Definitely check it out. It'll be much more intuitive, much easier to learn from if you play around with it yourself. But let's just do that overview. Okay, so first things first, we're going to talk about the lighting. We're just going to go through the collections one at a time. So in our first collection, we have this empty object right here. And this is actually, this empty object right at the root of our scene is actually driving the position of our environment. I find this to be a little bit easier than playing around with the UV mapping. So what you can do is you can get your coordinates from your empty object, map them to a vector that you then feed into your gradient texture. And then we're taking this black and white gradient and assigning colors along from black to white, and that gives us this nice fall off here. The B-spline setting here is what makes it so smooth. Before we were doing, I don't know, I think cardinal or something. It's a little harsher. I prefer the B-spline. And then it goes into the background shader. We can adjust the strength of it, and then it goes and then visually gets outputted. Lastly, for our lighting collection, we do have the sun right here. And this doesn't add too much to the scene. Honestly, I probably could delete it, but it gives a little bit of shadowing. And I kind of like that. Makes this other side a little darker. Kind of gives this nice area some crevice and stuff. I like that part. Okay, so just a quick overview of the rest of these collections. So we have these ground spikes and rock walls. These are actually just free floating objects. What we're doing is taking these collections. So on the left, we have these two objects. Those are our ground spikes, or sorry, our rock wall. And then these are our ground spikes right here. We're taking those objects, you may see it already. We're then scattering them along our terrain in order to build up the shape, get some variety, make it look like terrain. And so that's why we have these two collections. So just keep in mind when I reference the instances later, that's where they're plugged in. Okay. And then within the main collection here, we have the canyon, which is one object, and then the magma river, which is a second object. Now these are separate in the sense that we could move them in different areas within our scene, but these two objects actually share the same mesh data. So if we look right here in terrain, you can see we have two users. So the canyon uses the same terrain mesh data, and the magma river uses the same data. Why do that? That's because when I edit them, we edit both of them at the same time, because they are in fact the same object. Might be a little bit unintuitive if that's your first time kind of hearing about how that works. Super useful for geometry nodes, because this allows us to split up and process the same object differently. So if you have a building, and you want to do one effect like ivy, and then you want another effect like actually making the walls and things like that, you can keep those things separate, and they just look at that simple original mesh without all the clutter of your other graphs. So highly recommend that. But speaking of clutter, let's jump directly into this graph. So I've kind of added some boxes to help clarify what's going on. Let's start at the very beginning. Sorry, my screen's pretty small, so hopefully y'all can see this well enough. So our objects, all the color is coming from our vertex colors. So we're using a color attribute in our shader, color, feeding that to the base color, 0 roughness, and that's our terrain. If I made it one is super shiny, but then it hides the color, so useless. All right, for the graph, the actual GeoNode graph, what we do first is we start by bringing in this geometry. We are subdividing it a little bit in our twice in our modifier stack before I do the geometry node. Without the subdivision, it is actually this kind of jagged, low poly version, but then we get the nice and smooth. So that's what we're bringing in right now, is that smoothed out version. Then what we're doing is mixing and storing colors. So we're taking 2 different colors and then using this noise node, which we are feeding into a color ramp to get the contrast up. We are then blending those 2 colors together. Now, the main thing that visually makes this terrain distinct are those instances or stamps that we're putting on it. And we're using this node here, distribute and shrink wrap instances. This is a custom node. Any of the nodes with the green here are custom nodes. Nodes I've made myself. They don't come default with Blender. But what this is doing, in essence, it's a little complicated in here, but the general idea is that we just take an object and we distribute points along the surface. So for example, right here, distributing all those points. Then we do a little cleanup by merging them. You could think of that as kind of a clamp range, but for points. And then we're instancing all of our objects on that terrain. What's nice about the distribute points on faces is it does come with a standard rotation. Bada boom, right there. Which aligns it to the mesh and then to global Z. So you have your surface, lines it to its surface, and then points it up as best it can. Then we're rotating our instances. Just have a little bit of randomness here. Then we're doing something that's a little goofy, but we're turning them all into mesh. So rather than treating as separate objects, now we've turned them into one single object, and we're snapping that position to the surface. Now, it looks a little, what's actually happening is the entire object is getting stamped down to the surface. If I take out the offset right here, you can see it's actually perfectly flat. It is flush with the surface. And then using the original height of the object, we're pushing away from the surface we're snapping it to. So that way the boundaries of the object stick to the surface, but everything retains kind of that original character. I really like doing this over just distribution. If you go back and look at my icy bridge, the ice bridge mountain pass that I made a few days ago, that one just used distributing points with random rotation, but no shrink wrapping. And I feel like it looks good, but it doesn't give you the control you would really want out of it. Like, things don't blend. You don't have control over how they blend. It just looks, it's a little more chaotic. But here, I kind of feel like we get this really natural distribution, and it works with the form of the object rather than kind of conflicting with it. One cool thing too is you can change the scale. So if I got rid of the instance scale, you can see that now they all come in at the original size and then snap to the surface and offset. And this is kind of a great look all on its own. You know, I think in the future, I would probably go with much larger instances because they give just this really, really interesting rocky terrain. Look at all those nice little edges here. Honestly, I almost prefer this more, but I'm going to stick to my guns a little bit and stick with what we had before because that's what I initially made. But you can see there's tons of variety here. And most importantly, you can inject a lot of detail into your surface without having to rely on just a texture. Because just a texture, I'm not a big fan of displacement workflows, honestly. I'd rather just have some intersecting meshes. All right. So the main caveat to a lot of this stuff is that in our weight paint here, we have this vertex group. This is called my walls vertex group, and it's what we're using to control the scale of the instances, the distribution. All of that is getting controlled by our vertex group, which is nice. There's also a bit of noise in there too for some variation. We also are including this random rotation. So going back here, if we look at these rocks, you can see a little bit of disorder, but they could be perfectly straightened or perfectly random. I almost prefer the little bit of more structure right there. Feels like an actual cliff face a bit more. We'll get rid of that scale. Yeah, that looks good. I feel like this looks a lot more like actual terrain. Damn, I might just leave it like that. Next time. It looks good though. All right. So that's our distributing our points, snapping to the surface. Let's look at the next node. So the next one is our colors. So each of these objects, just as we're offsetting them, we're also using that same distance from per point from the original mesh, the terrain, versus the realized instance. We're using the distance from that to blend in two colors. The original color of our instances with the color of the terrain, which is what leads to this really nice blending here. Really love that because a lot of times you're kind of fighting to make things look natural, but blending in some vertex colors makes it super easy. And then the next one as well makes it even easier. So if I disable this, you'll see that the rocks now look much harsher. They're kind of popping out a little bit. Nothing wrong with that, but I like the kind of smooth blending we have here. And we're doing that by setting the mesh normal. How are we doing that? We're using a sampling the nearest surface. So we're looking at our terrain. We're absorbing the normal information from that, and then we're mixing that using the same distance to mix the vertex colors. That's this node right here, using our proximity node. So we have our proximity, we're blending the mesh normals, the sample normals with our original, blend it by distance. Pretty straightforward. That's a new node, by the way. I believe it only is in 4.5 and later. So if you don't see that node, you might need to upgrade. Okay, let's look at the next object, which is the river. So looking at our river here, what we do is we bring it in just like before. This time we're not subdividing beforehand. The only thing we're doing in our modifier stack beforehand is setting to the lava material. Then we delete our geometry. So this time we're deleting the everything that is not the river group, subdividing that surface so we get the nice smooth edges. And then we're setting the position. So this setting of the position was we're just offsetting the river. That is in order to, I go in here, let's just do a side view. So before, after, just gives it, obviously water would be above whatever surface it's sitting on, and we're doing the same effect here. But then we actually set the position one more time. So we're, all of this is getting moved away from the normals of the object, the normals of the surface. But this time we're limiting it, so we're only pushing out the interior. Sorry, it's a little hard to see. Okay, so yeah, we're only pushing the interior vertices, and we're doing that by using our edge neighbors node. Find the edges that only have one face, or sorry, we're finding the edges that have greater than one face, and we're selecting those. Then just scaling based on the normal using this scale node. Sorry, this is my second time doing this video, so I apologize if I'm a little tired. Okay, next one. Next we have this distribute. This is actually the same node from the prior graph. but we're distributing our ground spikes collection, which looks pretty cool, honestly. And then we just join those together. Now, for the distribution, the main difference between our prior distribution and shrink wrapping and this one is that we're using that same edge neighbor selection to determine where the density of these points is. So we're saying, hey, here are our edges. We kind of want to start distributing there. And then we use a blur node in order to kind of create some fall off. Without it, I believe it's just right on the edge, which is not bad. But I want a little bit of more of a natural look, or however you want to put it. Now, the important part is this evaluate on domain node. Without it, it doesn't actually work at all. It is extremely important that you understand this node and try to use it. A lot of times, if you're in a point where you're like, oh man, this really should work, what is going on? You need to use your evaluate domain, because information can kind of be stuck in either on the points or on the edges or on the faces or face corners, and it's not getting transferred as you would expect. So you need to use this node to translate it to the proper domain. Okay, and the last thing to say is just we're offsetting the scale of our points, so we're kind of just doing a bit of variation. Now, the mesh island is very important to that. Without it, we get this much more jagged look rather than kind of retaining the original mesh. So it needs to have an ID that it groups together. So for one instance or one mesh island, they all move the same amount. And we do that using the island index. Island index fed into the ID. All right, that's pretty much it. Thank you, everyone who made it to the end here. Again, this is available for free to download for free online on my Gumroad. Definitely take a look. I think that if you're interested in level design, game design, these tools are really going to help you out. They're already helping me out a lot. And honestly, I'm just super excited to learn more, because I think this is just the very beginning of all this. I think that there's so much more that can be done. And it's pretty amazing what you can accomplish in about an hour and a half with geometry nodes. All right, that's it for today. See you in the next one. Bye.